We go. I'm going to record this, and I'll post it to our YouTube page, which is just MCCC Funeral Service. And I don't make most of our videos public, but I'll make this one public. Well, if anybody needs the link to it, feel free to reach out to me. But like I said, it will be public on our page. Yeah, I'm sort of doing this a little different today. I'm crammed in my bedroom here, which is sort of I had to get a table from downstairs and move it up and all this stuff. Just because our house is very old. It's built in 1905, so it doesn't have central air, and I don't have air conditioning on the third floor, so I wasn't going to sweat it out the whole time. But in any sense, I'm going to put this link up here as well, which is a link to the notes on everything that I'll be covering. And I'll put that in the YouTube video as well. And like the comments or the description, I'll have that link in there. And yeah, it's just a list of the notes that I put in there. So now, as a side note, I don't farm questions or anything like that. I know that a couple of years ago there was a program that got in a lot of trouble for doing that with the national. So I try and stray away from that. But if you guys take the test, if you have any feedback as far as like, oh yeah, your review is spot on, or it wasn't, that's great. Reach out to me because I don't know what they put on this test. Like I said, as a disclaimer for everything, I don't know what the questions are. So I just base this off of our laws, rules, and regulations class. And if you didn't go to Mercer, you can feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in here. Oh, that's not it. There we go. There's my email address. If anybody needs it, feel free to reach out to me. And if we have questions while we're going through, feel free to chime in at any point. I mute everybody as a default just so we don't get all the background noise, but feel free to unmute yourself at any point. It's not a problem. You're not going to get in trouble or something. So feel free to jump in if you have questions. Now, a quick note about the review. I do not put like when I teach this in class, when I teach this stuff, I've got all the answers in front of me. I intentionally leave it open-ended here, just because the I want you to go back and look everything up. Let me share my screen. I've got way too much stuff open and it's throwing me for a loop because here we go. Can't get into Google Drive, so you have to give access. All right, let me see if I can hold on a second. I might have to change the way the thing is set up or something. Why is this not working all of a sudden? Hold on. Why will this not work? All right, this is not good. All right, well, I'll get to that eventually. And I just need to change the way that it's saved on there, and this will not let me escape from it for some reason. Oh, there it is. Hold on. Uh, share organization, we got shortcut, file information, security limitations, blah 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 blah. Why is this giving me a hard time on this? Hold on a second. Yeah, MCCC Fund Service is the um link for it. Why is this thing not working? I don't know. All right, I'll have to mess with this in a bit because it's giving me a hard time, and I'll just have to play with it to figure out exactly. I'll change the security on it or whatever needs to be done. I know that I've done it in the past. I just can't remember how I did it. So by later today, or the latest tomorrow morning, you should be able to download it. Why is this thing giving me such a hard time? Like, oh no, that's not right. Yeah, I'll toy with it later and hopefully have it up for you so that you can access it. I don't know why it's giving me a hard time. Rename, make a copy, share. Well, oh shoot. Hold on. I might have found it. Okay, people with access. Anyone with the link. Done. All right, I just got it. So now you should be able to download it. All right. I probably should have stopped recording while I was doing that, but so be it. All right. So as I was saying, um, this is the review, but like I said, I don't add everything on that I would normally add when I'm doing the classes, because in the classes I directly, have to do the assessment and all of that. Well, maybe you just need to give it time. I just changed it 1 second ago, so just give it time. Oh, and now it works. Okay, good. Sorry, Ruby, if you wrote that 6:37, I don't know what time it is now. So somebody, I thought that was the latest one, but I guess it wasn't. But in any sense, like I was saying, I don't keep all the information in front of me. So normally when I be teaching this in class, I go, oh, well, how long do you have to keep this? I know the answer because it's written in my notes. I intentionally leave it out just to leave it open-ended so you folks will have to look it up because I have found over the years that if people go back and review the statutes and regulations, they have a much better chance of passing this exam. So, like I said, the test is given. I'm sure you guys have this information. I'm just going to review it real quick. The test is given next Friday, which is what, the 11th. And is that next Thursday or Friday? But it's on the 11th, regardless. And it's given at the state board in Newark. It used to be given at Mercer. I don't know why it's not now. The 11th is next Friday. So yeah, that is a like I said, they give it right there at the state board at what 124 Halsey Street up in Newark. So that's where you're going to take it. And like I said before, you need to review all the statutes and the regulations. Now to get to them, this is just for your records. They're not going to test you and say, oh, what's 45.1, what's 45.1 dash whatever. You don't need to know the corresponding numbers, but this is where you would find everything. And this is a good slide just to keep for reference purposes. I have other ones too that it's not a bad idea to just save it somewhere. And then if you do have an issue and you go, oh, well, what does the state board say about OSHA or about pre-need or whatever? I have another slide that lists all of those. That's a good one to hold on to. But this link down at the bottom, that's a hyperlink. And I might have to change that one too, but you should be able to access it. And no, that doesn't have to be changed because I'm sorry, I forget which one I put in there, which one is for X and which one's for Y. That takes you to the page, the state board's page, where it the all of the regulations and all the statutes are listed. So you have to know both. You have to look through both. And I don't think you're going to see questions like, is this a statute or a regulation? But you need to know the difference between the two, and you need to know which's in both. The regulations, when you look at it, that book is much longer than the statutes. And if you remember, if you took laws, rules, and regs and you went to a different school, I'm sure you have a similar corresponding course. And if not, let me know. I can give you my notes for my course or whatever. But the regulations are what's put into place by the state board. So the regulations are where you're going to see things like, okay, what's in a prep room, what's required in a prep room, et cetera, and so forth. Whereas the statutes tend to be like licensing information. What do you need to do for a license in New Jersey? What comes from the license? Like, what are you barred from doing before you have a license? Things like that. And the statutes go up directly to the state senate, and that's where they pass these things. Whereas the regulations, like I said, just come from the state board. So the regulations tend to be much longer because a state senator or something like that they won't know or care what goes into the minutia of, okay, what are we going to require in a prep room? What are we going to require as far as oh, let me think here. As far as, oh, okay, the sign, what needs to be done with the sign, what needs to be done with the manager's name, stuff like that. That would all fall to the state board who develops the regulations versus the statutes, like I said, which comes from the state law, from the law. Why am I blanking on this? From when they passed the laws in New Jersey. And again, here's another example of where you can find these things. And again, they're not going to ask you what's NJSA 14A or NJSA 52 or something like that. But you do need to know the minutia of each. But like I said, don't bother memorizing the numbers because I've had students do that before, and you're not going to get a question like that. So again, things that you do need to know. And again, like I said, it's I don't see the test. Even when they used to give it at Mercer, like that was given by the testing department, and they would not. I asked, but they would not share any of the information with me. The things that you do know, the difference between a license and a certificate of registration. Sometimes it's called a COR, and a COR is required as far as the building is concerned, the actual funeral home, the establishment versus a license, which is for the individual. A death certificate versus a burial permit. Again, where's the death certificate issued? In what township can be filed? What's the difference between filing a death certificate and getting the actual copies made? The certified copies, meaning like you can. I've seen funeral homes register it locally or in the municipality of death, which is ultimately where it would be stored. Back when we had physical death certificate, that's where they would be stored. But today with the digital, that's where you're supposed to get them. Somebody dies 10 years later. And again, today we always go into EDRS and order it there. But what if you get a call from somebody who died in 1992 or something like that, or their family? It would be them if they died in 1992, but you get the point. And where would you get that death certificate? Well, it'd be the municipality of death, and you do need to know that. But you can file the death certificate as far as the funeral home is concerned in three municipalities: the municipality of the funeral home, the municipality of wherever disposition is being done, or in the municipality of death. So those three things, those are key concepts that you should remember. It's the basic concept that ultimately, the death certificate would reside in the municipality of death, right? So those are the three places that can be filed. And then I've seen some funeral homes that will file it locally because they want the local registrar to see their name on a regular basis, which again makes sense from a marketing standpoint. But then they'll order the death certificates from the state, meaning it's filed locally, and then you order them from the state because they're cheaper. They're normally cheaper to get from the state, and it varies municipality from municipality to municipality as far as how much they're going to charge. I've seen some states, or I'm sorry, excuse me, some municipalities charge like $5 for the first and $10 for each additional death certificate, or $2 for the first and five for each additional, or five for the first and two for each additional, and things like that. Actually, it tends to be higher in the first one. I did that one backward. The five for the first and two for each additional, that type of a thing. So what some funeral homes will do is you can file it in one area, but then get the death certificates issued from a different. That's fine. You can always order them from the state. So what do you need a license for? What can you not do right now, right? Arranging and pre-need, Mm. Also, this is an energy drink, not an alcoholic beverage. So I always point that out as well. Anyway, arranging and pre-arranging, right? As an intern, or as a non-licensee. My wife works at a funeral home. She's not licensed. She's not allowed to do arrangements or pre-arrangements. I mean, theoretically, she could because she's been exposed to it enough. But yeah, legally, she absolutely can't sign a death certificate to embalm. You need somebody with a license at disposition. Now, that was relaxed a little bit during the pandemic. They were allowing interns to take decedents to a place of disposition, normally a crematory during that time in particular. But that has since been pulled back. I should probably pull that out because you really don't need to know that anymore. Supervised visitation, dressing and casting, and dual removal. You don't have to be licensed for any of that. I worked at a funeral home that if there's a night viewing as licensee, it's the director in charge of the funeral. You were required to stay there until the viewing got started. Like if it's, let's say, a 7 to 9, you'd stay until about 7:30 or so, just to make sure the family was fine, and then you would just leave. And they had part-timers come in and work the viewings. That's perfectly fine, perfectly legal, nothing wrong with that. Dressing and casketing or removal, no, absolutely, you can be non-licensed and do all of that stuff. I can't tell you how many times I drug my wife down. We owned a funeral home, and she would have to come down and dress bodies with me or something like that, and that's perfectly fine. Again, perfectly legal. License renewal. I'm sure that's right. Yeah. License renewal, right? It's done every other year. Now, on the even years, that's when you would register a funeral home or up their license. And then on odd years, that's when you would re-up the license for the individual, for the funeral home. And I always put that little goofy joke in there. Morticians, they really know how to party. Like, it's a goofy thing, but I left that in there because the way I've always remembered this is every licensee I've ever met, and most of my family is licensed. My mom's is licensed. My dad was licensed. My brother's licensed. My brother married the daughter of another funeral director. Like, it's just, one of those deals. I've been exposed to a lot of funeral directors over the years, and they're all oddballs. And that's how I remember, that On the odd years is when funeral directors renew their license, and on even years, it's for the funeral home, and it's every other year, right? So renewing expectations for continuing education. We need 10 credits of continuing ed, and we'll explore that a little bit more later on. But what goes into that, right? Like the specific in-person CEUs that you have to do for every licensing period. What's involved in that? License lap, renewal requirements, and time issues. We'll get to that. I created a different slide because they changed it slightly in 2019, but we'll cover that in just a minute. But all stuff that you need to know, all stuff that you need to take into consideration. All right, continuing ed programs must be approved by the board. New for 2019, premium providers must monitor attendance and ensure completion of the lessons. And again, whether or not you are going to do CEUs as far as teaching them, that's up to you. Anybody can do it so long as you approach the board and you send them a layout of what you're doing. I just got approved for 1 credit for the preceptor training that we do. And I just sent the slides and everything to the state board. They looked it over and said, yeah, that's fine. You can get credit for that. But if I do that, and I have to monitor and make sure everybody's there. CEU must maintain records for 5 years. And again, I don't know why they would test you on this, but they tend to, meaning that it's good to remember the time frames. Anytime you see a time frame, remember it. How long do you have to renew your license? How long, if you let the license lapse, can you come back and renew it? Things like that. But anytime you see a time frame, always make a mental note of that because that's things that they tend to ask questions on. An inactive license, they used to have these. And it's the idea that, yeah, you could let your license lapse. Like my mom is 85. I don't think she's going to re-up her license next time around. That's because at 85, what do you know? Like, and she's not really practicing anymore. She'll make a cameo at a viewing and to say hello to people. But she's lived in that town for like 50 years at this point. But if she lets her license go, so be it. She's not embalming or making arrangements. But it used to be you could leave the license as quote unquote inactive, and then you could still put the person in advertisements. And they've since said, no, it's too complicated. Like just let it go. Like you can't have inactive licenses anymore, which you may see questions on. Like inactive licenses are just gone. License lapse, right? Less than 5 years. In 5 years, the tipping point where things change on it. It used to be you have to complete all delinquent hours as far as CEUs were concerned and pay all previous fees. Now it's just the previous licensing period and the licensing period after that. Meaning, if you let your license lapse for 5 years, it used to be you would have to do, like, let's say you, right at the end of 5 years, you request that your license was renewed, right? Like on the last day, the state board used to come back and say, well, you would need to do 25 credits because there's 2 licensing cycles, meaning you need 10 credits in each. And then if it's 5 years, that's half of another licensing cycle, meaning that, 2.5 of that would be 25. They've since said, no, 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 you just need the one from the previous licensing period and this licensing period. Also, with the amount that you had to pay, it's just the previous licensing period and the new one. Meaning that half a year, they just sort of dropped it and said, fine, instead of doing 25 credits, or you're right at 5 years. Oh, okay. Well, then, you're right at that 5 year mark. You don't have to do that extra year, that 5th year. You just need to do the current licensing cycle and the one before that, right? Also, in 2019, they changed it so the state board will recognize out-of-state CEUs. So let's say you let your license lapse, but you're still practicing in New York or you're practicing in Pennsylvania or something, and you're still getting CEUs for that. Well, when you come to renew your New Jersey license, they'll recognize the CEUs from out of state. So you send them those, and let's say PA requires 6, but let's say you just got 10 in PA. Well, great. Then you could use all 10 of those. It's not a problem. You can use all 20 if you get them all out of state. It's fine. Now, in normal licensing, you can't do that. But just when you re-up your license, they go, well, if you were practicing in another state, then fine, we'll accept those. But you can't, as a licensee, just take classes that are approved for Pennsylvania and import them to New Jersey. They have to be approved in New Jersey. The only time you can use out-of-state licenses, as far as your New Jersey license is concerned, is if you're re-upping a license that has lapsed. It's one of those key issues. And over the 5 year mark, things change. More than 5 years, and I'll get to this, I have a slide for it, but more than 5 years, the state board will determine on an individual basis. So don't give you any specifics. So if you let your license lapse for 7 years, let's say, and you come back to the board, they don't have it in writing as far as what they want to do. They just go, we'll deal with it on a case-by-case basis. So there it is right there. New Jersey State Board will decide applicants on a case by case basis. So there's nothing there that you can really use. I don't, I mean, maybe they would ask about this. I don't know, but I want to include it regardless. What do you know about record keeping, right? The funeral home files and what's in them. And that's important. And I have slides on that. Oh, I hope I didn't freeze up. I freeze up. Am I moving? All right. I don't know if can you guys hear me? I look frozen on
Yeah,
my
you're
screen.
moving. You're fine.
Am I moving? Okay, it's frozen on my screen, but that's fine. So long as it's coming through to you guys. So the funeral home files, like what's in those funeral home files as far as like if the funeral home pays for the clergy, well, then you need to keep a record of that and who the clergy was, for example. You need to keep on record who did the embalming if there was an embalming, what licensee did it or what intern did it, the date that it was done, the date that the service was done. All that stuff needs to be recorded in the file. Most of us don't care because it's already, if you use one of the computer programs or something, then it's fine. It just records all of that for you to begin with, and that's fine to keep everything electronic. If you have like funeral data manager was one. There was one that was MIMS, if I'm not mistaken. But if you use one of those and you keep everything digitized, that's perfectly fine. You have to keep records for 7 years, meaning if you see a question, how long does the funeral home have to keep information, regarding a clergy that did a service and the funeral home paid the clergy, then yeah, you have to keep that for 7 years. If the family paid for the clergy, you don't have to keep that record. Like if they theoretically, if they either paid for them or they set it up and paid for them, you don't need to keep that record. But the 7 years is the key point. You need to remember that 7 year mark. And with that, the first year has to be available immediately. So the state board shows up and the inspector shows up and like, we want to do a search of the place, or we want to go through your files. You have to give them the files for the last 12 months. They have to be accessible immediately. The previous 6 years do not. They can be stored, off of the funeral home campus, if you will. If you have a ton of files and you want to move them into storage, fine. They just need to be available in 2 weeks. So you have 2 weeks to get that information to the state board on anything over 1 year old. Itemization. How do you prepare statement of funeral goods and services with a discount? Oh, that just caught up to me. Anyway, that was weird looking. Like my image, like I was frozen for like a while, and then it went through. I guess it was recording everything. It was on super fast. It was weird looking. Anyway, so the statement of funeral goods and services with a discount. If you have a package, for example, a package deal that you offer, and I used to do this wrong all the time. I worked for a funeral home for years, and they never said anything. I don't think anybody really cared, but this was years ago. This was like 20 some odd years ago. But when I was working for them, they had like this great package, and you basically just put everybody in a package. But when you would go into the let's say the showroom or something, you could tell people, okay, well, we're at $4,500 prior to going into the showroom, and people are like, fine with that, great, wonderful. And I would just write $4,500 as that for everything we did from a professional standpoint. Then I would add everything onto it. You're not supposed to do it like that. You're supposed to figure out how much your package discounts it down. Let's say it's a $600 discount. It means that you have to write up the cost of the embalming, the cost of the removal, the cost of working service, cost of a limousine, hearse, whatever you're including in that package at the normal price as reflected in the general price list. And then at the end, you would discount it down $600. That's the way that you're supposed to write it up. At a matter of convenience and speed, I would just write it up as 4,500 plus. And I was wrong when I did that. That was absolutely illegal the whole time. We never got in trouble for it. No families ever complained or anything like that. But anyway, it is what it is. It's another thing to remember. How long do you need to keep those records? We already talked about that, the 7 years. Um, FTC forms for New Jersey compliance, right? Here's the idea that, yeah, you need to know the FTC stuff. And if you don't have that FTC book on the funeral rule, reach out to me. I have it digitized. Actually, let me take a look real quick and see. Actually, no, I'll look for it later. But I do have that. If anybody needs it, I have it digitized. You're always free to email me and I can send it to you. But the FTC book outlines everything the FTC requires, but you need to know what the differences are between New Jersey and FTC. Meaning FTC requires the name of the funeral home, the address, the telephone number, but New Jersey says, no. You also need to put the manager's name and their license number on it, and a couple other things that are specific to New Jersey. So you need to know the difference between the two. Prep room expectations. And I have another slide on that as well. That's a ton of things that are required in the prep room. And I'm going to go through it. I'm not going to go through it. I'm just going to show you the slide and you guys can look at it on your own. But the equipment, the structures, prohibitions, what are you not allowed to have in the prep room, right? And that's really anything that is not that does not specifically have to do with embalming, you can't have in the prep room. Even a stretcher, you're not supposed to have that in a prep room. You can have that in to move a decedent off of it, but the expectation is, okay, you move the decedent, now get the stretcher out of here. You can't store it in the prep room. A lot of funeral homes do, and you probably don't even get fined on it if the state board shows up, unless you're a jerk to the inspector. And if the inspector ever shows up, always be polite. Always, always, always be polite, because they can always find something to fine you on. Um, but yeah, you need to know the difference between the two as far as FTC and the state. You need to know what New Jersey requires as far as the prep room expectations. They can come in and look through your instruments to make sure you have at least one aneurysm hook, you have at least one trocar, you have at least one cannula or arterial injection tube. You need to have one drain tube. You need to, it goes on, but you need to know that list in some capacity. Now, the physical funeral home itself, what's required with each funeral home versus the living quarters, right? So I put two pictures on here. This is a funeral home my wife and I looked at a couple of years ago. I kind of looking back on it, I kind of wish we had bought it. They were giving it away for almost a song, but it needed so much work. I don't know. But yeah, the this funeral home has the funeral home right here, and this whole house is the living quarters, but it had a connection here. And they used to bring people in the front door and they would just like hide everything in that area because it was a living room, and they would just sort of cover it up and make it look like, let's say, a TV or something like that. They would put something on it to make it look like it was a countertop. Like they would put like, cover it up with a not a sheet, but a tabletop or something like that to make it look appropriate. And they would bring people to the house and then down into the funeral home, especially if they had a really big funeral. Or a really big viewing, you're not allowed to do that. You can't send somebody through the living quarters. It needs to be separate and distinct from the funeral home. And legally, if the inspector showed up while they were doing this, they would get a fine. But so long as the inspector's not there, I'm not saying to do this, but so long as the inspector's not there, I doubt anybody's going to call the state board on them. But again, that was illegal for them to do. You need to have it separate and distinct. And the way that they argued it was, well, we just shut this door right here during viewings or funerals, and that's, this is the living quarters versus everything in there is the funeral home. It was a little wonky, if you ask me, but it is what it is. So again, normally funeral homes will just have the living quarters on a separate floor, and that's perfectly legal to do. So long as you have it distinct, even if it is on the same floor, that's fine, so long as there's a distinct separation between the two. Now, I put this funeral home in here because I used to work at this funeral home many years ago. This is the Frank Vidian Funeral Home in Broomall. It's a great funeral home, really nice people. But here's their prep room over here, this little side building over here, this little carriage house, right? We used to spend time over there, like, we would just embalm all day. And we would sit up there. If we didn't have an embalming going on, we'd play poker, me and two other guys. And you could hear if somebody came in, like if the boss came in, we could take a sheet, cover up the cards real quick, things like that, just goofy stuff, But the reason I included this was in New Jersey. Now, this funeral home is in PA, but let's transport it to New Jersey in our minds. Let's say that the prep room and the funeral home are two separate buildings. Let's say they are on two different properties. Like let's say this goes from, let's say 12 Main Street to 14 Main Street, right? Like it's not uncommon for funeral homes to be large enough that they absorb a separate property and just make that part of the funeral home itself. If it is distinctly open and there's a way to egress or pass from the prep room to the funeral home directly, then you can keep it as it is. However, if there is a noticeable separation between the two entities, right? Like the prep room, let's say that, they're separate properties. It's like I said, 12 Main Street and 14 Main Street. Let's say that, there was a huge, between the two, there's, not a forest, but like trees or something like that, that distinctly cuts the two off. Or let's say a solid fence, one of those privacy fences that doesn't have a door to it or something. No, that doesn't work. That prep room would need to be approved with a separate certificate of registration, meaning it would need everything that a funeral home would have. meaning you would need area to make arrangements, you need to have restroom facilities, etc. Everything that's required in a funeral home, you would have to have in that prep room or that prep facility, and would have to have a separate certificate of registration. This does not come into play much because most funeral homes would just, posed with that, I'm assuming most places would just, create some way to get from point A to point B that was clear and open, and then you're fine as far as the statute is concerned. That's a wonky one. If you have questions about that, reach out to me. But it is one of those things that you don't see a lot, but theoretically, you could definitely see that on the test. You don't see it a lot in practical situations, though. Here are the requirements for the building, or for the prep room, right? Leak-proof trash can, instrument cabinet, disinfecting, drainage, viscera bucket, embalming table, porcelain metal, with the drainage in the lower end, hydro aspirator with an approved vacuum breaker, because they don't want anything, if you're aspirating, they don't want anything to work its way back into the plumbing. If you have back pressure or a blockage, so that's why they require a double breaker on there. Oh, there we go. Um, Waste sink with a minimum of 2-inch drain. Why they require a 2-inch drain, I don't know. But I remember when I took the test, and I'm going back 25 years, I remember seeing a question about that. I'm sure that's not on there anymore, but who knows? Maybe they'll throw another one in there. A wash basin with hot or cold running water, potable water, one leak-proof container for storing dirty linens, for each licensing and training, protection apparel, so OSHA stuff, PPE, and must be required by all applicable standards of OSHA. One container of hardening compound, one set metal or rubber drain tubes, large, medium, or small, one set medium injection tubes, large, medium, or small, one aneurysm or needle hook. So aneurysm hook or aneurysm needle. And if you remember from lab, the aneurysm needle, the only difference between the two is the needle. It is exactly like an aneurysm hook. It just has a hole in the front of it, so you can put ligature on it and you can ligate a vessel. Again, I don't know why funeral directors have such a hard time ligating vessels. There's like 10 different instruments on the market to ligate vessels. You just lift the thing up, take tweezers, and put ligature underneath it. I don't know why it's more difficult than that. One large trocar, one small trocar, meaning a baby trocar or a parietal needle, one scalpel, one pair of scissors, two hemostats, two forceps, one hypodermic syringe, hypodermic needles, assorted suture needles, suture thread, electrical powered embalming machine. So you can't just have the old gravity one, which is kind of silly if you ask me, because some old embalmers still use that. Clear or white or flesh-colored adhesive tape. This is an interesting one. I think I have this included in miscellaneous later on. But the reason they put that in is a family went into a funeral home and saw that the person had plastics on them, and they took duct tape and wrapped it around the plastic to hold it down, which I've done many times in my career. It just makes it so if you touch there, you're not going to feel the plastic under the clothing. They saw it and they put in a complaint to the state board saying, yeah, well, why was duct tape on my dad or my grand, whatever it was. And the state board came back saying, no, okay, well, you need to have flesh-colored adhesive tape to use, so it's a little more hidden. And everybody came back and said, well, what the hell is flesh-colored? How can you define that? And they came back and said, well, each community will decide on its own. Okay, that's ridiculous, but it's one of those deals. It's included in the regulations, so you need to know it. All instruments and appliances used in embalming should be thoroughly cleaned and disinfected immediately after the conclusion of each individual case. But you're supposed to clean everything in the prep room and all the instruments and everything right at the end of the embalming. So in case that does come up. Potable water supply. All owners and managers shall ensure that potable water supply is not open to the danger of contamination from any source. And that's that fear that you'll be aspirating and something will kick back into the system. Like, let's say you had a funeral home in a strip mall. I don't think anybody does, but let's say you did. The fear is that, if you were aspirating, something went wrong in the plumbing, and the aspirate that you're removing from the decedent made its way into the plumbing system. It could go through everything in that whole strip mall, meaning somebody with a store with some sort of a business next door. They open up their faucet to have a glass of water, and all of a sudden, aspiration fluids are coming out, which again is a gross thought, but I don't think it's ever really happened. The requirement A above may be satisfied by the installation of an approved hydroaspirator or such other device may be necessary to accomplish the purpose of this rule. Any infraction of this rule shall be reported immediately to the board. Burial preparation performed in separate room. No embalming other than preparation for burial or disposition of a dead human body shall be performed in any funeral establishment except in a room set aside exclusively for that purpose and approved by the board for that purpose. Meaning you can't have a room that you're like, oh, well, it's a prep room until we have a viewing, and then we just, gussy it up a bit and we call it the ladies' restroom. No, that wouldn't work. You're not allowed to do it. It can't be a multi-purpose room. It can only be for embalming. I think it goes without saying, but yeah, price disclosures. It goes back to the FTC. The FTC says, all right, well, you need to know what they require as far as somebody calls up. But in New Jersey in 2019, they said that the manager can designate an employee, even if unlicensed, to provide price information on the phone. So let's say somebody's just particularly good at talking to families, or somebody's just been trained in that, even if they're not licensed. Like I know my wife has to give out pricing information all the time. You got a price shop or somebody's calling up, and you're allowed to do that, even if you're not licensed, so long as you're just reading off of the general price list. Now, as a non-licensed individual, you cannot sit down and make arrangements with the person. Now, an intern can, but like my wife couldn't because she's not an intern. Responding to questions concerning information not on the price list shall be referred to a licensee or an intern, meaning that's where you're really getting into the, the deep um, into the weeds of everything in that that individual would be sitting down and making arrangements really if you're getting into doing more than just reading off of the general price list or off of the casket price list or whatever, right? If you're going to talk about something that's not listed in there, something that's a little bit broader, you need a licensee or an intern, because the licensee or the intern are expected to have made funeral arrangements and are in a position to do so. So that's, if somebody's just reading off it, that's fine. But if you're going to get into the minutia, I keep using that term, the minutia of, designing a funeral, that's when you need a licensee or an intern to actually make those arrangements. Multiple ownership. This is a New Jersey thing. For both national and for the JP exam, you need to know the difference between what's required at a federal level and what's required at a state level, because New Jersey is so specific on these things. Um, and they say that you have to have this on your GPL if you have more than one location. A person who owns 50% or greater interest of this registered mortuary also owns 50% or greater interest in the following registered mortuaries in the state of New Jersey. You have to put that on there along with the name of the funeral home and the municipality where it's located, and a description of it enough to identify it. That really goes into the name, the funeral home, and the municipality. That multiple disclosure only needs to be on the general price list. So you don't have to put it on the casket price list. You don't need to put it on the outer burial container price list, just on the GPL. But this is a New Jersey specific thing, right? And things like how long do you need to keep the general price list? Well, the FTC says 1 year. That's fine for the national board exam, but New Jersey requires you hold on to it for 3 years. And I had a student say to me, maybe it was over the spring or maybe in the fall when we did this. She was saying, "Oh, the way I remember that is GPL is 3 letters, and New Jersey requires you to keep it for 3 years." So I was like, "Oh, that's really smart." So that's a nice little hook to be able to remember that. And the fear here is that, let's say somebody walks into a funeral home and you actually have bought the competing funeral home, and you own both places, and they come in, you go, "Oh, the funeral's going to be $7,000," and they go, "Ah, that's ridiculous. I wouldn't pay more than 6,200 for it." They storm out and they go, "Oh, I'm going to use another funeral home." And you call over to your other funeral home and you go, "Yeah, yeah, they don't want to pay more than 6,200." And they go in and you go, "Oh, well," the other funeral home goes, "Oh, well, come on in. We could probably do this for 6,200." And the family's like, "Oh, that's the exact amount we wanted to pay." That's what they're trying to keep you from doing. They feel it's dishonest, and it is. It really is when you think about it. We had to do this because we owned 3 funeral homes, and initially we didn't put it on there. I'm glad we didn't get reported during this time, because we looked at it like, okay, I own 40% of this company, my brother owns 40%, my mom owned 20%. Well, and so none of us own 50% or more. Well, no, that's not the case. We own 40% of a company and its holdings with a funeral home. So there's just one company that owns it. 100% of the ownership is in that company. It's just I happen to be one of the owners of it. So there's no getting around it. If you have multiple funeral homes, you need to put that disclosure on there. mortuary use issues. It used to be that you could not recover anything from a body at the funeral home. You could do an examination to determine the cause of manner of death, meaning you're allowed to have an autopsy done. And you could always have an autopsy done at a funeral home. And if anybody's had I'll say the pleasure, because it is an interesting thing to see, of seeing an autopsy, it's so fascinating. And if you haven't had the chance, and the funeral home does, for whatever reason, have a private autopsy going on, go watch it. It's wild to see, and you're allowed to do it. Pathologists will come right out to the funeral home and do it, and they charge a couple $1,000s to do it. It's not uncommon for it to be five, six, seven, even $8,000. But if the family's going to pay it, it's worth watching. It's really fascinating. You're always allowed to do that. Now, they switched it in 2019 and said, okay, well, you can use the funeral home to collect a lock of hair. You're always allowed to do that. But you were not previously allowed to collect DNA. And now they've switched that. They said, okay, you can do a cheek swab, like you take like a Q-tip and rub it on the inside of the cheek or whatever, nail clippings and our blood collection. You're allowed to do that at the funeral home now. I think it was silly that they barred us from doing it previously. I know a lot of funeral homes that just said, whatever, did not listen to this. That's not a good thing to do. You can get in trouble for it, but a lot of funeral homes did. For testing purposes, remember what's in the book and always answer that accordingly. Don't base this on what you do at your funeral home in particular, but what's in the regulations and the statutes. You know what I mean? Food in the mortuary. This was a big one. I always like to if we were in class, I would try and pick everybody's brain to see what your feelings are. If anyone wants to chime in, feel free. Because I always find this is an interesting dividing line. I love the fact they allow food in funeral homes now. A lot of funeral directors hate it. They go, no, I don't like it. They're going to make a mess. The funeral home where I work, it's funny because the owner hates it, and he's sort of begrudgingly allowing like a coffee maker in there and stuff. And it's funny to watch him. But and it is what it is. It was for years you were not allowed to do that. You were only allowed to have water in the funeral home. Now you're allowed to have food or coffee or whatever, but you cannot serve or allow to be served alcoholic beverages, and you're not allowed to prepare food at the funeral home. So if people show up with food that's already prepared, that's fine. You can't come in and go, oh, well, we brought a hot plate and we're going to start cooking up a stew or something. I don't know, but you're not allowed to do that. You can come in with food that was prepared somewhere else, though. Somebody shows up with, I don't know, a Chick-fil-A plate or something like that. I'm so hungry. I'm dreaming about food, but it's you're allowed to do that. If you close a funeral home, and this is another one you need to know, you must show evidence to the state board that the EDRS count is closed. You must inform the state board of the location and individual in charge of the records, because those records have to be held for 7 years, which is the next line down. The first year being available immediately, and the next 6 years being available within 2 weeks, right? But you need to tell them, okay, well, we're going out of business. I'm 68 years old and I'm wrapping it up, and I'm just going to shut the place down and move to Florida or something like that, or I'm selling the property to a CVS that wants to open here. I've seen that happen on a number of funeral homes, and the owner makes out very well on that, because I think CVS or Wawa or whatever pays a lot of money for real estate. And that's fine to do, but you need to move all your records to somebody who will oversee them. And the competing funeral home down the street. You can take my old records, and it's a good way to, if somebody calls me, I'll just direct them to you, and you can get business out of it or whatever. So it's but you need to put that in place, and you need to disclose that to the state board as far as who's in charge of it. Interns, what impacts you folks? The preceptor qualifications, what are they? Right. And again, basic things like you can't have been arrested for anything involving funeral service in the last 5 years. I don't know why they put that in. If I was making the laws or the regulations, I would have just said indefinitely. But a preceptor has to be licensed for at least 2 years beforehand. And like I said, can't have some sort of an arrest having to do with a funeral home in the last 5 years. How many interns can a funeral home have? Only 2, which I don't think makes a lot of sense. For each individual intern, you need to be doing at least 25 funerals a year, and that does not include stillborns. And the way that they figured this is, if a funeral home is just doing 25 calls a year, if an intern did everything at the funeral home, meaning they did every embalming, they worked every funeral, and they met with a lot of the families, by the end of their internship, assuming they're doing a 3-year internship, that 75 would be 25 in the first year, and the second year you do another 25, that'd be 50, and the third year would be 75. That's where they came up with that number. But some funeral homes, like I've seen funeral homes that do like 1,000 calls a year, and they're only allowed to have two interns. Doesn't make any sense to me. But the minimum amount of calls that you can do to take on an intern is 25 calls a year, not including stillborns. And a funeral home can only have two interns at any given time, which again does not make sense to me, but it is what it is. Intern specific time, cases, and background. Remember that, the breakdown of the concurrent internship versus the internship when you're taking funeral service classes. When the state talks about a concurrent internship, they assume that, and what they're meaning by quote unquote concurrent is they're talking about that 2 years or however long it takes you to accumulate the initial 60 credits that's required prior to funeral service. So let's say you're starting school, like my mom did this. She had never taken any college classes. She had to get licensed. She became an intern for the first 2 years. She was doing her first 60 credits. So she was an intern during that, and that would be a concurrent period. When she started the funeral service classes, she was no longer considered concurrent, although you're doing the internship and the schooling concurrently. So I don't know why they don't make it for the whole period, but they don't. They specify a concurrent internship as during the initial 60 credits. It's no longer considered concurrent when you're doing that last year. Or if you come in and you already have a bachelor's degree or a master's or PhD or whatever, and you come in, you go, oh, I already have the 60 credits. You would never have a concurrent period because you already hit that 60 and you would just start in the funeral service classes. Even though you're most likely be doing the internship concurrently with school, if you're doing mortuary classes, it's no longer considered concurrent by the state board. Feel free to ask questions on that one. That's a weird one. Took me forever to wrap my head around it. So the time that you do the internship, remember, by default, it is 2 years. So depending on your academic background, by default, when they initially issue it, they say it's 2 years. If you don't have any credit, right, any college credit, you would do the 2 years, and then they'll give you a third year without question. You just send them a letter and go, I need a third year. They go, fine, you can have a third year. But if you remember, if you have more than 90 credits prior to starting funeral service education, so let's say you did a bachelor's degree, or let's say you did 3 years of schooling and it was all full time, and you had 90 credits, then the internship will drop down to a minimum of 1 year, meaning that you already have a bachelor's degree. You start in a funeral service. Okay, by default, it'll be 2 years. When you get the certificate, the mortuary qualifying certificate or the academic qualifying certificate, which again is the same thing. I don't know why they give it two names: the AQC or the MQC, academic qualifying certificate, academic qualifying certificate. So AQC or MQC, same thing, two names. I don't know why. Wonderful state of New Jersey. And when they review that and see that you have more than 90 credits, they would then go, oh, okay, you could be done in 1 year if you choose to. Like I did my internship. I started it in, I'll say like July of 2001, I'll say. And then I got licensed in August of 2002. So I had the internship for 13 months, but it was less than 2 years, obviously. So, I had enough credit, my background, they dropped it down to 1 year. The cases, remember, it's 75, 75, and 25. 75 embalmings, 75 funerals, 25 sets of funeral arrangements. And the background just refers to the academic background, which we already covered. Internship extension. How early do you need to send everything in to the state board if you need an extension? You're coming up on the end of your internship and you think you need another 3 or maybe 6 months. So let's say get to the licensing exams. Well, how long before the internship lapses do you need to send the request into the state board? And I don't have the answer sitting in front of me. I want to say it's 2 months. It might be 3 months, but it might just be 30 days. I can't recall what it is. That's a good one to look up and just make a mental note of. If you fail the state board in practical, you have to wait a month, and then you can re-register for it. That's when they actually come out and watch you embalm somebody. And like I said, the concurrent intern we already talked about. So, and I don't remember the last time I had a student fail the practical exam. It tends to be something everybody passes so long as, and if you've done 75 embalmings, it should be pretty straightforward. It's nerve-wracking, I'll admit that, but most people pass it, on the first time through. But if you are unsuccessful on it, then you have to wait 30 days and you can re-register for it. I hope that doesn't happen to anybody in here. New for interns and preceptors as of 2019, preceptors cannot be convicted of a crime in the past 5 years. And they do go, well, the crime must be related to funeral service or a crime of moral turpitude. And that's the same thing as when we are talking about the preceptor qualifications right up here. That falls into that. You can't be convicted of a crime in the last 5 years, either having to do with funeral service. Like, let's say you got arrested because you were, I don't know, you had a gambling problem and you went into the pre-need account and took a bunch of money out. It's almost impossible to do that anymore, which is a good thing. But this happened in the 90s a couple of times. That's why they changed on the laws. But if you were found guilty of that, then you can't have an intern for 5 years. Or a crime of moral turpitude, meaning, rape, murder, things like that. So if you have that in your criminal history, yeah, you can't be a preceptor for 5 years. Kind of sounds silly to me, but cannot have a revocation, suspension, or surrender of a license from any professional board. Meaning, if you had your license to be a hairdresser revoked for some reason, well, you can't be an intern, or I'm sorry, you can't be a preceptor. Let's say you had your license as, like my wife's a dental hygienist, and she keeps her license going, although she hasn't done that in years. But if she had that license revoked, well, then when she went for a funeral director's license, if she ever did so, she would have a tough time securing the internship, number one, with the state board. She'd probably have to explain why she lost the initial license. And depending on that, they would make a decision, but she wouldn't be able to be a preceptor for at least 5 years. Intern application is now available on the state board's website, which most of you, I'm sure, are probably familiar with it. It used to be your preceptor would have to send a letter in writing to the state board to request the application. I think what happened was years ago, I think in like the 80s or maybe even earlier than that, somebody registered with a funeral home without letting the funeral home know. I think it was a very ambitious person who, was trying to push the issue with the funeral home. They're like, oh, well, I'll just register with the state board. Well, no, the state board saw that and they're like, yeah, we're not going to allow that anymore. They have since gone back on that and said, oh, okay, we'll just make the application available to anybody. So it's right on the state board's website now. New in 2019, licensees are now required to notify the board in writing within 30 days upon conviction of any crime. So, this is anything: an arrest, a summons, indictment, admission into pretrial intervention, guilty plea to any violation of law, ordinance, felony, DUI, a misdemeanor or disorderly offense in New Jersey or any other jurisdiction. So even if you're over the bridge in Philly, let's say, and I don't know, the Eagles win a Super Bowl and you get arrested because you were trying to punch a police horse, which I wish I was making that up, but it absolutely did happen. I think in, what was that, 2018, when the Eagles first won the Super Bowl, somebody punched a police horse. How out of control are Eagles fans? But anyway, let's say you did that and you got arrested. Even though it's in PA, it doesn't matter. You still need to tell the state board about it. You need to disclose that to them. They don't care. The only thing they don't care about is speeding tickets. If you get a speeding ticket, a parking ticket, they don't care about that. But any arrests, if you get arrested, and the big one is DUI. I see that all the time. It used to be you would only re-up, or you would only send this. You only had to report this to the state board when you renewed your license. Now they switch it to, if you get arrested for anything within 30 days, you need to send a letter to the board and say, on this date, I was arrested for whatever. And it used to be in the forum that month, everybody ran to read the forum, when you had to report it only on that odd, or on the odd year when you went to renew your license. And everybody'd run to read the forum because you wanted to see who got arrested over the last 2 years. And it would be interesting. You'd see people and go, oh my God, like I knew somebody, I read that they got a DUI. And then I saw them. I was like, oh my God, what the hell happened? He was like, different person. He was like, they just had the same name. I was like, really? I didn't believe the guy. I looked it up and yeah, it was a different person. But now it's just in the forum, each month as a matter of they put the notes from the state board in the forum, their agenda and what they covered at whatever meeting. So it's now just in the forum on a monthly period. A month by month period, I should say. So state board clarified interns' responsibilities as participating in funeral arrangements, preservation, washing, or disposal of dead human bodies, making funeral arrangements on behalf of any licensed practitioner of mortuary science, quoting prices when funeral arrangements are being made, all stuff that they're expecting you to do, which again is a good thing. When I was an intern, they did not require anything with arrangements. There wasn't the 25 funeral arrangements were not required back in those days. And the standard of how you learned how to make arrangements, just, yeah, go figure it out. which was a bad idea. I know the first set of arrangements I made, I was like, my head was spinning. I thought embalming, like, so long as I can embalm, everything else will fall into place. No, man, arranging is so much more difficult than embalming. Something goes wrong during embalming, you turn the machine off and go, okay, what's wrong with it? Something goes wrong during arrangements, man. You got people in there, and people can be complicated, man. I would say the dead are easy, the living are complicated, right? So yeah, but this is all stuff you're expected to be doing as an intern. Preceptor is responsible for reviewing and executing the statement of funeral goods and services with the intern before providing it with the consumer for review. So if you write up a statement of funeral goods and services, it's fine. You need to take it to the licensee who would then review it to make sure everything's fine. You could then present it to the family. And again, not a difficult thing. A lot of times we've had interns and we would just tell a family like, yeah, this individual is working towards their license, so we're meeting with you thing. Families tend to be cool with it, at least most of them do. But it's all stuff that you need to know for the test. Interns and advertisements and/or business cards. Interns can be listed on the in the advertisements. You can have a business card. You can be on the website, and the website is beholden to all advertising laws, and any social media that the funeral home has also is beholden to all of the advertising laws, or the advertising regulations, I should say. Meaning that if you have a Facebook page or a Twitter page or Instagram, I don't even know how Instagram works, to tell you the truth, or TikTok. I don't even understand how TikTok works. I don't know. My wife's on the damn thing all the time. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to work it. But if you have one of those things, it's fine. But you need to put everything in there that would be in your advertisement, meaning you have to have a manager saying the license number, the address of the funeral home, the telephone number, et cetera, and so forth, right? So interns advertisements, the intern ad or website, social media to be listed as the name of the intern and the registration number, the intern registration number on your card, whatever that is, needs to be included. The same way that the licensee, the manager needs to put their manager number, or their license number, excuse me. You need to put the license number as far as your intern registration in any ads in which you appear. If they put me in an ad for the funeral home where I work, it wouldn't matter. I don't need to put my license number because I'm not the manager. But if we had an intern, then anytime we listed them, we would have to put them in as an intern, list them as such. All right, different forms of ownership. We need to know the difference between a corporate ownership, as far as an LLC versus a proprietorship. What are the differences and what are the benefits and the downsides to each? And you need to know this both for this test and the national. I know that there are sections of the national that have focused on this over the years. What do you do in the death of an owner? How long do you have to notify the state board of who is going to be the new manager, right? You need to look that up. I forget what it is. I want to say it's 14 days, but I could absolutely be wrong on that. Look that one up and double check. If anybody knows to throw it in the chat, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. A new installation. What do you have to do with the new installation? Meaning that's a new COR, a new certificate of registration. So let's say, like we bought an existing funeral home back in 2007. And as such, that was a new certificate of registration. We were taking over that funeral home and they had to come out and do an inspection and everything else. That goes like as if we were opening a new funeral home from the ground up, like from scratch. Now let's say you move your funeral home. You're in a building, the building's all right, but next door that doctor's office would be perfect for us. The doctor comes over and goes, look, I was thinking your place would be perfect for a doctor's office. And you go, great, let's just switch locations. And you switch locations. That's perfectly legal to do, but you need to get a new certificate of registration because that is considered a new installation. The state looks at it as a new business. If you close a funeral home again, what's involved in it? What do you have to do with the telephone number? What do you have to do with your files? What do you have to do with the sign? Right? All of that stuff comes into play. Like the sign has to be covered up. We bought a funeral home in 2011, and the place was basically shut down. The previous owner, his son, I think, had a drug problem, and the owner kept all the money for pre-need just in a bank account. The son got a whole. It was a mess. So he just signed the funeral home over to a nursing home that he was living at, and they're like, okay, fine, sign it over to us, and you can live here. And he just lived there at the nursing home until he died. The nursing home didn't know what the hell to do with the place, so they never covered the sign up. It was shut down. Everybody knew it was shut down. They never covered the sign. The day that we made settlement, we had to rush out there to cover everything up because as a licensee, they can come after our license. Like, let's say another funeral home was like, oh, let me call the state board and report them because they have a sign out where they're not open for business yet. We could absolutely have been fined on that. If a private entity owns a funeral home, they don't know what they're doing, the state board tends to not go after them. Theoretically, they could, though. Unlicensed owner, are you allowed to have an unlicensed owner? Absolutely. Um, my mom owned a funeral home for 3 years. My dad owned it. Well, they owned it together. My dad was licensee. He died in 1985. My mom got licensed in 88. She had to go up and get to Mercer after he died and get her, get licensed. Perfectly legal to do as an unlicensed person, so long as you have a manager listed and you have a manager on file, which we did. Pre-need, right? Licensee, you need to have a license to sell pre-need. Some states say that you don't. Pennsylvania used to be like that. It was a nightmare. Anytime I'd meet with the family, and I would look at the file and it was done prior to the law change in PA. And I'd be like, oh no, because if you have somebody who's not licensed and they're meeting with family, they'll tell them anything to just close the deal. That's, somebody who was selling cars last week and they're selling funerals this week. It was a mess. And I would tell families like, oh yeah, you'll probably get like $3,000 back when you actually come in. And I would meet with families all the time, like, no, that's not the case. In fact, you owe us like $1,800 or $2,000 if you want to go forward with the plan as laid out. It was always a train wreck, but all the more reason to have a licensee do it. Creates accountability and it creates a reliable set of arrangements are made. Signatures on form is as doing pre-need, you need to have the family sign off on the statement of funeral goods and services. Remember, if somebody comes in for like a price quote, you're going to check off the price quote and then they don't have to sign it. The licensee still has to sign it. But the family doesn't have to sign. Like I had a family once who like, got all sheepish with me because they were like, I was like, I just need you to sign this paperwork. And like, well, we're not comfortable doing it. I was like, it doesn't, you're not obligated to anything. I'm not going to send you a bill or anything. It's just if the state comes in and looks at my files, they need to have a signature on these things. And I had one family who was really reluctant. We ended up getting the call at the end, but it was a pre-need situation. I just checked the price quote, and that's fine. They did not have to sign it. If you are putting the money into a pre-need account, you have to give them information on that pre-need account. Where's the money being held? What do they need to do if they want to move it or if they want to close it? Can they close it? Can they not? What's the deal? All of that has to be disclosed to them. And if you're dealing with choices or you're dealing with an insurance company that already has all the stuff lined up, it's already all in there. Like if you pull out one of the folders for choices, it already has everything pre-printed. You just need to write the decedent's name on there, or the person that you're making the arrangements on, and whoever's going to be accountable for it. Everything else is already filled in. Change of funeral home. Family comes in, they go, well, we don't want to use you anymore. We're going to use the person across the street because we don't like you now for some reason. Okay, fine. How long do you have to give that funeral, that money, those funds to the other funeral home? It's either 10 days or 14 days. It's another one I cannot remember off the top of my head, but you need to look that up. That's an important one to know. God, it used to bum me out so much. When we bought that funeral home in '07, I remember like you're always going to lose a certain percentage of your work with the new owner. And it just broke my heart every time we would just get a letter from Choices going, oh, you lost this call to so and so. And we're moving the funds into their account rather than yours. And it would tick me off to the no end. And we ended up, it was fine in the long run. We got the numbers, actually, we got the numbers higher than they'd ever been. But it was one of those situations. It was just like the first year in business. Every time I'd receive one of those letters, I'd like, it would drive me up a damn wall. But it is what it is. You need to know the time frames in that. Trust accounts. And I have another slide on this, and we'll get this later on. At what point can you have a master trust where you're allowed to take 1% of the interest? Right? You have to have 200 or more accounts. It's one of those magic numbers, meaning that you just send the family down to a bank and you can open up a trust there. It's perfectly fine. I know a very large series of funeral homes that actually have this, and they started their own trust because the place when I worked for them years ago, they owned at the time I want to say 35 or maybe 40 funeral homes, and so they just created their own trust. Perfectly legal to do. You're allowed to do that. It's just once you're over that 200 that threshold of 200 accounts, you could then take 1% of the interest, meaning if annually the interest rate is normally 7%, the family would only receive 6% of it, with 1% going back in to actually run and manage the account, which makes sense because it's large enough at that point. You're going to need to bring somebody on to look after the stuff and get the paperwork out to families. And you need to send them annual statements and all that. You need to send monthly statements to the funeral home and all that good stuff. The pre-need ledger, what's required to be in the pre-need ledger. And this is an important one. And there's also one of the first things that the inspector asks for when they come to the funeral home. That pre-need ledger is key. So you need to have that, and what needs to be in there as far as each account. Things like you need to have the date that it was open, the amount of money that was initially put in there, anything that has been put in there since, the current balance, all of that stuff needs to be included in it. I had an inspector come in once, and he just pulled out our pre-need ledger, and he just highlighted a bunch of names and said, "Get me these files." So I was like, "Okay," and I got him the files, and everything was fine. But that's one of the first things they look at when they come to the funeral home. All of this can be stored electronically as well. That's perfectly fine to do, so long as you have it in a discernible way. Whereas the inspector comes in and goes, "Well, what's up with John Smith's funeral?" Okay, here's what it is, and here's what the pre-need is, and here's how much money they initially put in, here's how much it's worth now. Perfectly fine to do, but you have to have it accessible in some capacity. A cancellation fee? No, you're not allowed to have one in any way, shape, or form. You can spend 4 hours making pre-arrangements, and a family goes, we thought about it. We want to use a different funeral home. You can't charge them for your time. I mean, it is what it is. You have to give them a price, and you have to write everything up, and you're not allowed to charge for it. The only thing you're allowed to charge for is the funeral at the time of death. You cannot charge for anything prior to that, which is a little strange if you ask me, but I think it does create, again, accountability on the funeral home side. And 100% pre-need trust, meaning everything that the family issues to you, you need to put in the trust. You can't keep a percentage for the funeral home. This is not the case in every state. Like, you can't go, "Wow, you gave me $1,500 for direct cremation in 1990. Actually, I had this happen. I had a woman make arrangements out in Florida in 1991 for her mom. And then she moved to New Jersey, and her mom moved to New Jersey, and she wanted to get the money from this account. And we called the funeral. I'm like, "Yeah, you can have the initial like $1,800, but all the interest we keep." And I'm like, "That's ridiculous." Like, "No, thought we have to store everything." I was like, "You're not storing anything. That's a bunch of nonsense if I ever heard it." But it's Florida law, so we were stuck by it. In New Jersey, it's not the case. Everything you put in, everything they cut to, you need to put into an account. You can't take anything out of it prior. And if the family wants the money back, you have to give it back. If they want to go to a funeral home, you have to sacrifice all that money. You can't go, "We'll keep a percentage for the funeral." No, you can't. Everything needs to go. Um, Trust issues, that 200 number is what I was talking about before. Commissions are legal, but only on newly issued insurance, meaning somebody comes in with an insurance policy and you're going to switch the ownership structure of it. So maybe somebody's going on to spend down or something like that, and they need to get that out of their name, so it's not an asset. Perfectly fine to do. You tinker with it, make the state the beneficiary and the funeral home the absolute assignee. If they're going into an irrevocable type situation, all you're allowed to do, but you can't take a commission for that. If somebody comes in, they go, "Well, mom's 80 and we want to set up a pre-need account for her, and here's $10,000. Fine, you can put that into newly issued insurance. There are a lot of companies that will work with people on this, and if you don't have it already, it's worth looking into getting an insurance license. I've let mine lapse, but I had it for years, and it was great because I would sit down with families, and sometimes the trust was better for them, sometimes the insurance was better for them, and you could make a judgment call, and you could lay out all the pluses and minuses to families and let them choose. But on newly issued insurance, and some funeral directors make their whole career out of this. I know funeral directors that don't direct funerals, they don't do any at need, they just do all pre-need, and they put everything into insurance. And the commissions they make a ton of cash. So it's worth doing. Payment on death accounts, a POD, perfectly legal. I've had students over the years to go, "Yeah, that's all we do. We just send the family down to the local bank, and they put all the money in there. The interest, it goes back to them or goes into that account. And then, when death happens, we just take a death certificate down to the bank, and they release the funds." Perfectly legal to do. Most funeral homes do not. They tend to put it in a larger trust or into an insurance policy, but perfectly legal to do should you choose to. Again, new things in 2019, you must notify social services when there's any refund on irrevocable prepaid funeral. It used to be a $500 threshold, that it was $499. Let's say that you do the whole funeral and there's an overage, there's money left in the account for $499. You could just issue a check back to the family. Fine. Now you can't. Anything above it, if it's $2, you do the funeral, they buy the same casket, you do the embalming, you do everything as you normally would. and then you get the money back from the state, or I'm sorry, from the excuse me, from the trust or whatever you use, and there's an overage of $2, you have to report that to social services on an irrevocable situation. If it's 30 cents, you need to, send it to them. I get it in a lot of places with 30 cents, just sweep it under the rug, but in the actual print, it says that you need to return any, or you need to notify them of any overage. I remember the idea with a prepaid funeral, an irrevocable prepaid funeral, is that it is a protection for the state because people used to use, and they changed the law in 2000. I don't think you need to know that, but I think it was October 15th of 2000, the law changed. I don't know why I remember that, but I can't remember how long it takes for, when the owner dies, but I remember that for some reason. Go figure. But it used to be people would be able to use that as a shelter for funds, meaning, okay, mom's dying, let's sell, or she's getting old, let's take $100,000 to sell our house, put 100 grand into a funeral fund, and then it doesn't count towards mom's assets. When the death happens, fine, we'll spend $10,000 on the funeral, just cut us a check for the 90. That was legal before 2000. And then the state said, no. If we're going to be paying for your medical expenses, no, you need to go through spend down, and they have a 5-year period where they can look back at somebody's financials and say, no, you have an account here, you owe us this money, or whatever the case may be. But like I said, all that goes into pre-need law. And why do we have an irrevocable versus a revocable? I remember the idea that you can only go into an irrevocable if you're within, if you can make a reasonable guess that somebody will be going on to Medicaid within the next 6 months. That's your key, is when you can put them into an irrevocable or not. Advertising, you have to have the names registered with the state, which makes sense. If you have Brand X Funeral Home, and you go, no, I'm going to call it Brand X Memorial Home. Yeah, you can do that, but you need to change it with the state before you put it into any advertising and put it on your sign or anything else. You have to list the manager and their license number. With novelty items, like a small pen or my uncle used to get golf tees. And he would just go to the country club or go to the local golf course or whatever and just throw tees all over the place. They would just say, Bud, and that's so small. Golf tee is very tiny, so you can't put all of that information on it. It'd be impossible to read it. So they go, you just need 2 lines. You have to put the funeral home name, to Brand X Funeral Home, and then the municipality in Riverton, New Jersey, wherever it is. A logo and obits. So I'll show you an example of this. This was really big for a while. It's starting to fade out, but the law is still in place, where if you put a logo in your obituary, the funeral home has to pay for it. They consider that an advertisement. So they go, no. You can't force the family to pay for your advertisement. And if you're putting an ad in, it then falls under all the advertising regulations, meaning you have Brand X Funeral Home, you have a logo. Like I remember there was one that had like a big bridge and like a lighthouse, and it was like your bridge over troubled waters or something like that. And they were making the families pay for it. And then the state eventually came back and said, no, you can't do that. If you're putting a logo in there, that's an ad. And like you would get 2 bills from, let's say, the Courier Post. You would get one for the obit that the family would pay, and one for the advertisement, which is just that last little block that shows the logo of the funeral home. And so it had to have the manager name, their license number, telephone number, the address, and all that stuff. If you just are putting the name of the funeral home in the obit and saying, family and friends may call Monday from 7 to 9 and Tuesday from 9 to 10 at the Brand X Funeral Home, 321 Main Street, that's fine. Perfect. You do not need to put the manager's name and all that stuff in there, because you're just listing the place of a service or a viewing. But again, if you're putting a logo in, that's where it changes. I'll show you one here in just a second. Testimonials. You cannot pay somebody for a testimonial if they have not used your funeral home. Meaning, like I've seen a lot of over the years, like a lot of the Philadelphia Phillies will show up in ads for I live around the corner from a big dealership. What's the name of that place? Kerbeck, FC Kerbeck. And they're always advertising on the radio and whatnot. But I remember they had like Cliff Lee in a bunch of their ads, maybe Allen Iverson when he was at the Sixers and all this stuff. And they would run ads, perfectly fine if you're selling cars. If you're selling funerals, the person has to have used your funeral home for you to use a testimonial from them. So, let's say you bury somebody in, I'm going to go back to the Eagles here, Jalen Hurts' family. Oh, okay. And he was very pleased with everything. you could talk to him and go, well, can I use your name in one of the ads? If you give me a testimonial. And he goes, yeah, sure, perfectly fine. But if he has not used a funeral home, you can't do it. Now, price reduction. This is a weird one. There's another odd one. What they say is they give you 30 days. A price, you cannot discount a price and advertise it if the price was higher, was not higher, was if the price was altered in the last 30 days. Meaning you want to advertise something as, come in, if you come in this month, these caskets are reduced by half price. Yeah, it's fine to do, but you can't have tinkered with that price in the last 30 days. Meaning you tinker with the price. And what they're afraid of is that you would take a casket that's selling for $300 and you make it $600, and then you run an ad and you go, look, I'm going to sell this casket half off. It's only $300 rather than what we're selling it for right now, which is $600. That's dishonest because you just changed the price, you ratcheted it up and then moved it back down to the original price for advertising purposes. I mean, clothing stores do this stuff all the time. It's like a bait and switch. Hence the reason they do not permit it. So if you want to do that, I've not seen a lot of funeral homes that advertise prices. You would have to change the price to $600 from the original $300, wait 30 days, and then you could run an ad going, oh, we'll come in and buy this casket for half price. It's only $300 where it's normally $600. Again, one of these dumb things that really does not come into a lot of practice, doesn't have a lot of practical application, but you have to know if it's a test. Again, here would be an example of the logo and the obituary. Again, I'm not picking on the good folks over at Chanowski Funeral Home. It's a perfectly nice funeral home. When I was making these slides years ago, I went to the Courier Post, and this is the first one I saw, so I just grabbed it. But if you're running something like that, again, if you just have viewing 7 to 9 at Chanowski Funeral Home, fine. But if you run an ad like this and it has a logo, well, no, they say, you can't require the family to pay for all this. And since that's an ad, you need to put in the manager's name and the address and all that good stuff. So advertising includes any way you disseminate information to the public, meaning aerial displays. I don't see a lot of these for funeral service, but who knows? You're down at Wildwood, you pay a plane to fly by and it says Brand X Funeral Home, dragging one of those advertisements behind them or whatever, right? That would fall under the advertising regulations. Not something you see a lot of, but they include it in the regulation for some reason. Circulars, handbills, flyers, letters, anything you're sending out to the public to get the message of use my funeral home needs to be considered an ad, and it all falls under these regulations. And any other similar item, document, publication, or device used to communicate to the general public or to a specific group. New in 2019, all advertising regulations extend to the funeral home website and to social media. I cannot tell you how many funeral homes that I've gone to their website to look something up or whatever, and I just look out of curiosity, and the manager's name isn't listed. You're supposed to have the manager's name and license number. I'm not reporting anybody. I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble, but I see it all the time where people just don't put it in. They just never thought of it. And years ago, it didn't matter. Now it does. So anyway, funeral home website, and again, any social media that you're using, all of that falls under the advertising regulations. Now, fines, again, numbers you need to know. And again, they give a couple examples of specifics in the regulations. I'm not going to get bogged down with that. Probably not a bad thing to look at. I don't think they're going to beat you up too much on it. But again, I'm just sort of guessing at that because, again, I don't know exactly what's on the test. But the most that the state board can fine you is up to $10,000. If a second for the same thing and subsequent, they can fine you up to $20,000. That's the ceiling on the amount that the state board can charge you. Now, that does not include if they need to send out somebody to investigate you. Let's say they need to bring in a forensic accountant. That's not cheap and the state's not paying for it. So they would charge you for any investigative fees. Let's say they need to send a private investigator out to watch you. State's not paying for that. They're going to pass that on to you. You don't see a lot of that happening in funeral service, but theoretically, they could come after you for all of that. So interment issues, the depth of the burial. The way I always remember this is they say that you're being buried and you're not in a vault. You're just put into a casket and you're put into the ground, or you're put into, you're wrapped in shrouds or something like that and put into the ground. Let's go back to the casket. Let's say the top of the casket, again, it's not in a vault. If you're put into a sealed vault, doesn't matter. It does not have a and there's no issue with that as far as how deep the person will be buried. But if it is in a casket and it's not with a vault, the top of the lid has to be at least 4 feet below the surface of the ground. And the way I remember that is the casket is roughly 2 feet high, right? Ballparking it. So the bottom of the casket, if it's 4 feet required at the top, bottom of it's probably 6 feet under, right? So it needs a way to remember. It's the bottom of the casket is 6 feet. The top of the casket is what they're concerned about. About 2 feet difference between the two, and it's 4 feet at the top. Multiple burials. You need to know the regulations, both multiple burials in the grave and for disinterments, right? Meaning that you're removing somebody from multi-depth burial, right? It's the first person, and it was three people buried in there, like a triple depth grave. I don't know why I couldn't come up with the word triple there. My brain just froze on me for a second. Right. So you've got 1, 2, and 3, and you want to move this bottom person. Well, you need a permission from the people above them, the two people above them, to remove them, because you're going to disinter those two people while you're disinterring the third person. So you need to get the permission from everybody that's buried in there. And remember, with disinterments, and I don't know why New Jersey does this, but once somebody is buried, and if you want to disinter them, you need to have the approval of the next of kin or the spouse. Let's say there is a spouse, plus all adult children. I don't know why they do this. Prior to that, next of kin has all authority. Once a person is buried, now all of a sudden you need the kids to sign, adult children. I don't know why they do this. But again, keep that in mind. If you're going to disinter somebody and they're buried way down here and there's two people above them or just one person above them, you need to get the approval and all the paperwork done, the disinterment permit for that person that's above them, as well as the one below them. And remember, there's like 7 signatures on a disinterment permit. It's like the funeral director, the registrar from where you're moving the person, the next of kin, the owner of the grave, who might be different than the next of kin. I don't know why I'm sort of doing a John Cena here. The next of kin plus the owner of the grave, and that might be the same person, it might not. The cemetery personnel, they need to sign off on the cemetery where you're starting the process, and the cemetery where you're moving the person. If you're taking them out to a crematory and having them cremated, fine, that works as well. But if they're going into a different cemetery and you're burying them, and either way, you would need that other cemetery or crematory to sign off on the paperwork. So it's 7 total that you need for that. Also in the casket, you can bury multiple people in a casket, which again, you don't see a lot of, but it does come up. And the people who can decide this, it's the same as far as who can determine who does what on a funeral, meaning who's next of kin, right? You would go spouse, adult children, parents, siblings, and then so forth. Well, that's all the same if you want to bury multiple people in a casket. However, they include on there, as the very first person who can decide this, the decedent themselves. Meaning, and I think they include this because let's say that a woman's giving birth and she is dying during the process, and she knows that her child is going to die as well. And she says to her spouse, like, I'm going to die, but I want to be buried with our child. And that's fine. That's permission enough, although the husband could decide in that particular case. But yeah, they would, that's fine. So they include that, the decedent saying, oh, well, bury so-and-so with me. Perfectly legal to do. And that would be, proof enough to bury the person with somebody else. So that's the first person to decide. Then it falls to the regular next of kin status, being, like I said, the spouse, adult children, parents, siblings, and so forth. Like I said, disinterment we already covered. Disinter, like I said before, the consent of the spouse and all adult children, which is a strange thing. I don't know why they do it that way, but it is what it is. So cremation, what's required of a crematory as far as you need to have a presence of a licensee. You can't just, have the part-timers not licensed drive somebody to the crematory. It's the point of disposition. So you need to have a licensee there to make sure everything is done appropriately. Record keeping, what records did the funeral home need to keep, and what does the crematory need to keep? And if you took laws, rules, and regs, this is absolutely included on the slides in there. But there's a whole breakdown of the record keeping by the crematory. Like they need to keep the funeral home's name, the funeral director in charge, the day the cremation was done, the disposition of the cremated remains, meaning did they give them back to the funeral home? Did they mail them to somebody? Were they paid to just take them out on a boat and scatter them, or whatever the case may be? They need to include that in their files. Likewise, what are the files that the funeral home needs to keep in case of a cremation? And that goes back to the whole record keeping thing we were talking about before, and holding on to records for 7 years and the funeral home file and what goes into it. So everything that would be kept in there, what's included in that, how long do you need to keep it? The idea that for the first year you need to have it on site, for the next 7 or the next 6 rather, it needs to be accessible, within 2 weeks. And then after that, outside of 7 years, they don't look for the records anymore. Most funeral homes keep them back to the, I've seen records back to the 1800s in some funeral homes. Unclaimed cremated remains in New Jersey. After 1 year, you can dispose of the cremated remains, so long as you make a diligent effort to contact the next of kin or whoever's in charge of it. So, outside of a year, you can send a letter. Most people will send like certified letters. They'll send like 2 of them and keep copy that they signed off and received them. And in the letter saying, okay, well, we need to, we're going to bury the cremated remains or scatter them or whatever you're doing with them on this date. And if you want them, please contact us beforehand. And if you don't, we're going to scatter them or we're going to bury them or whatever the case may be. So long as you tell them and you dispose the cremated remains in a respectful manner, then it is perfectly legal. You can't just take the cremated remains and throw them in the trash. Well, they didn't want you. I don't want you. That's you're not allowed to do that. You have to give them a respectful disposition, and that can be burying them, that can be scattering them, that can be scattering them at sea, whatever the case is. The statement of funeral goods and services, new in 2019. Statement is at the top. And again, this is minutia I'm really getting into here, but they changed all this stuff, so I just include it. This statement is subject to change by the agreement of both parties. So you can make a change on there. So as long as both parties sign off on it or write their name or initial next to whatever changes you make, realistically, I always find it's just better to tear it up and start fresh. That's my feeling on it. Check boxes for sex has been removed, and it just says sex because sex and gender, all that stuff have gotten more complicated over the last 10 or 15 years. Let's say if somebody come in who is non-binary or something like that, you can just write in there non-binary. The decedent was non-binary. Sanitary care without embalming is changed to other prep of body, use of facilities and staff are reviewing, changed to visitation. Added to use of equipment and staff at graveside, the line including accompanying of remains to the place of final disposition. Again, I don't think we'll ask questions on that, but they did change all this stuff recently, so I want to include it. More changes, receiving and forwarding of remains are now on different lines, so they're individual line items. Again, that's one of the areas where you can package it up, and you only need to put that charge in there. It's not like a package deal. That and direct cremations, and direct burials are the only time you can just write that one charge out. If your direct cremation charge is $2,100, you can just write $2,100 on the cremation charge and whatever else is you need to put in there. Versus if you have a package where you go, okay, if you get our gold package versus our platinum package, here's what's included in that. Those you would have to write everything out individually and then discount it down. Like I said, let's say it's $600 discount. You just need to discount it down at the end, but you need to write all the initial charges in to the statement of goods and services. So, and then they put in there, if an optional package service is selected, categories 1 through 3 are not applicable. Then they've changed that to if you select an optional package, see general prices for a list of included services. So the first question everybody said was, oh, can we do a direct cremation with that and then tack on a memorial service? No, you're not allowed to do that. That's barred both at the state level and at a federal level, meaning you can't charge somebody the $2,100 for direct cremation, then put a memorial service on there or whatever, right? Because a direct cremation has no services. And that's what that charges for. That's why you're allowed to package it up. If somebody's coming in, they're just cremating dad or whomever, and they don't want any services. Once you start adding services and stuff, you need to add all of the charges. You need to put your basic service fee on that, removal, transportation of remains to the funeral home, transportation of remains at the crematory, use of a hearse to transport or whatever. Let's say you're having services, use of facilities for a memorial service or whatever the case may be. You need to put all that stuff on there on those individual lines and have it all itemized. So anything outside of a direct cremation, that's when you need to itemize everything. Other wording changes: church or clergy are changed to officiant, or place of worship, newspaper notice to obituary charges, pallbearer has been removed, but you can write it in to, in the cash advance items. Price reduction removed, but can be written above grand total, meaning they don't have it pre-printed on the page anymore. But again, if somebody gets a package, you can just write price reduction in. And again, let's say it's at $600. You can put like minus 600, however you present that to the family. So miscellaneous concepts of where to file a DC. I covered this right at the beginning. There's three municipalities: funeral home, the municipality of the funeral home, municipality of death, and municipality of disposition. But you can get death certificates from any of those three or from the state of New Jersey. But remember, the state cannot, quote unquote, accept a death certificate, meaning that they want it done at a local level, because if you send it up to the state, they don't know enough about the local area to make a decision or a judgment call as to whether or not the information is accurate on there. I got a phone call from the local registrar one day, and she was looking at, I put in there the death happened in Riverside Township. And she was like, yeah, the death didn't happen there. Or I'm sorry, it was where did they live? Because the death would be medical information. You're not able to access that. So, but I put where they lived as Riverside, but it was actually across the street. It was right on the street, and the other side was Delran. And the registrar called me up and said, yeah, I got to kick this back to you. Because, if you go there and once you cross that street, that becomes Delran. I was like, oh, geez, I didn't realize that. If they literally lived 10 feet over, they would have been, they would have been in Riverside rather than Delran. But if you send it to the state, they won't have that intimate knowledge of the area versus, a local registrar who very well might. Hence the reason you can't file it with the state. You can get death certificates from the state, but it has to be, quote unquote, accepted at a local level. Cost of the permit is $5. Renting a funeral home to another. This happens all the time. And I've been guilty of this myself. And it's been done legally in most cases, meaning somebody has a death in their family, and that family member lives in another town. You call the local funeral home and go, yeah, my aunt just died. She happens to live in your town. Do you mind if I rent your funeral home? Most cases, people go, yeah, fine, whatever. You cannot do that unless you get a special use permit from the state board, meaning you have to send them a request outlining the name of the funeral home that's renting it, and it can't be just a licensee. It has to be a manager or the owner that rents another funeral home, so that you don't have, Joe Schmo, funeral director, who runs an ad saying, just call me when you have a death. And then when that happens, he just tries to call a local funeral home. Oh, yeah. Can I rent your place? You're not allowed to do that. It has to be one funeral home renting another for that very reason. But if you do it, again, you need that special use permit. I know a lot of funeral homes do not do this, and I'm not calling the state board on them, but it is what it is. This is what you're supposed to do as far as the state is concerned. A receiving vault. Here again, something you will never see. When I first started teaching this, I had to call up my predecessor and go, what the hell is a receiving vault? And I had never even heard of one. Maybe I heard of it when I was in school and I just forgot about it. But a receiving vault is, it's not really applicable anymore. And even when it was, it tended to be like in areas like Albany or something like that, where it gets so cold that you can't bury somebody in January or February or even March in a lot of cases. So they would keep somebody in a receiving vault. Well, a receiving vault in New Jersey, there's regulations on it. It either has to be completely underground and sealed so that it prevents the escape of noxious fumes, or the decedent has to be embalmed. If an unembalmed decedent is held in a receiving vault, they can only be there for 48 hours after death. Or if it's completely underground and completely sealed, you can have somebody that's unembalmed there. If the person is embalmed, then that no longer applies to them. Now, again, you're not going to see a receiving vault. I don't even know if a cemetery that has one. I think Harley and Camden might have one, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So again, talking about the clear white or flesh colored adhesive tape, we talked about that earlier. Welfare versus Medicaid. Again, we always say Medicaid funeral. It's really not. It's a welfare funeral. Medicaid it sounds nicer. It's easier to, talk to a family about, oh, well, they qualify for a Medicaid. It sounds kind of harsh. You go, oh, well, they qualify for a welfare funeral. Yeah, the amounts, right? You need to know the amounts. It used to be $22.70. I forget what it is now. My wife would know because she always handles all this paperwork. I forget what it is off the top of my head, but you need to know that. And if you remember, there's 3 different amounts you can get. Stillborn, some person is a child dies in the womb and then is brought out. Okay, up to I think it's 6 days, I want to say. that a child be alive, it's a certain amount. 6 days or 7 days to 2 years, I think, is the next amount. So, you're not going to charge full tilt if somebody's loses their 18-month-old child or something like that. So they have a second tier. The first is, again, newborn. I want to say until 6 days. You need to double check that. Or stillborn, rather, to 6 days. The next one, I believe, is 7 days to 2 years. I know the 2 years I'm right on, but I think it's 6 days in that lowest tier. And then anything above that would be, beyond 2 years. I forget what the amounts are, but you need to know the amounts. How much is given to the funeral home? How much is given to the cemetery? How much can the family divide? And I'm just pointing this out because it's for testing purposes is weird. It used to always be the PA 11. People look at it and go, what, Pennsylvania? No, it's Public Assistance 11 was the form that you would use. They've since changed that to the Work First New Jersey, which was a federal program changed during the Bush administration, the second Bush administration. No, wait, that's all chat there, but I lost it. Adult 3,056, family 1,570, and cemetery 711. Thank you. I said I figured somebody would know it. I just can't remember what it is off the top of my head. I tend to not handle that paperwork. So it used to be the PA 11. They've changed it to the WFNJ, the Work First New Jersey. I've had students come back and tell me they've seen this on the tests and they've seen both. They've seen both. Like, what do you do with the PA 11? I've had other students go, no, I saw a question that said about the WFNJ 11. I'm not sure how they are going to present this information to you, but you very well may see this. So you need to know the difference. You need to know that both exist. I don't want to throw anybody for a loop if you see the either PA 11 or WFNJ 11 on the test. You should know what they are because it's the same thing. The one was phased out for the other. You'll still see the questions. You'll still occasionally see PA 11 pop up on the test from what I've been told. Where's the claim submitted? This is done at a county level, right? Another important thing to keep in mind because each county is different. They all have their own requirements and they all have their own requirements for what you need to do to actually get paid, and what you need to do to get approval. Like I live somewhat close to the border of Camden County and Burlington County. Well, anytime we deal with Burlington County, it's a small enough county that it's easy enough to deal with Medicaid or the welfare office. Whereas Camden County is an absolute nightmare. God, Camden's a pain about this stuff. But Camden has more people on welfare. It just is what it is. So it's they're a little more difficult about it. But it's done at a county level, and each county is different as far as their requirements. An emergency burial permit. This was phased out really because of EDRS, because you can just print the burial permit. But remember, the idea of a burial permit is that you've got the state's approval to dispose of human remains, and that you take a death certificate, you prepare it, you then present it to somebody at the state from the state, meaning registrar that works for the municipality. They review the information on it. They go, oh, okay, you can bury the person. Here's our approval in a burial permit. That's the way that it worked for decades. And when EDRS came along, it blurred the lines a little bit on that, which is fine. But it used to be, let's say it was a long weekend, there was a holiday, and somebody needed to be buried very quickly on like a Saturday, and the death happened on a Thursday, you could go to a judge and get an emergency burial permit issued. It's a pain, but it could be done. If there's no person in charge of a cemetery, then the funeral home has to file the applicable paperwork. And this is like, if you have ever seen like one of these old town cemeteries, like I used to live in Riverside, and there was one in that town that they probably hadn't done a burial there since like 1955 or something. But it was still a cemetery and you could bury people there. And if you did, there was nobody that worked there. You would have to, file the paperwork on that. You would have to send send the burial permit into the state, things like that. It falls to the funeral director if there's nobody in charge of the cemetery. The communicable disease list. I have a list here at the end. I feel like it's either the last slide or the second to last slide. And that lists all those communicable diseases. If you have a decedent with them, you need to report that to the state. And I've had students tell me, well, I just had somebody with yellow fever like last month or something like that. I'm like, oh, did you report it to the state? They're like, no, I think if you tried to report it to the Department of Health, I think they would not know what to do with it, but you're supposed to report anybody. If you have somebody that died of plague or something like that, you're supposed to report it to the Department of Health. And I want to say they give you 12 hours to do it. I could be wrong on that number, though, so look that number up. So you need to know the list of communicable diseases. There's 5 of them. It's like plague, yellow fever. Oh, God, what are the other ones? I'm blanking on all of them. I would say malaria, but I could be wrong with that. But we'll get to the slides and we'll take a look at them. Um, Reporting veterans death. This is a very rare thing, but that's one of the things they like to test on is rare things. So here's the scenario with this. The funeral director is responsible for reporting a veteran's death if the death happened outside of New Jersey. Now, let's say somebody dies in Philly, University of Pennsylvania, or something like that. You go over, you pick up the decedent. If anybody's ever been to University of Pennsylvania, it's a nightmare to make a removal out of there. Man, that place is a pain. They did move this little barrier thing that's like a post in the ground. Then you drive down, there's always students all over the place. And back down this awful, like it's almost like a hallway. There's two buildings so close to you, long alleyway, I should say. It's a nightmare. But let's say somebody dies in PA or wherever, and you bring them into New Jersey and they're a veteran, and you're burying them in a cemetery that does not have anybody in charge of it. Well, it then falls to the funeral director to notify whoever's in charge of veterans' death at a county level, meaning somebody dies or is buried rather in Burlington County, and they're a veteran, and you're going to that cemetery I was talking about before, they haven't done a burial since like 1950. Well, you need to report the death to somebody at a county level, whoever's in charge of the VA in that county, as far as dealing with deaths. Because the idea is that's the people that would go out and put flags and stuff like that on their graves on Veterans Day and Memorial Day and things like that. So they need to have a list of who are veterans and where they buried. They would normally be able to get this information either from the cemetery, if somebody is working there, or potentially they can get it from the state registrar because they have a list because they have all of the death certificates and they list who is a veteran and who is not. So it's the situation again is the idea that okay, you don't have a death certificate filed in New Jersey, so the Veterans Affairs is not able to contact the state registrar to find out if John Smith is a veteran or not because the death certificate was not filed in New Jersey, and like I said, there's nobody in charge of the cemetery. That's when you'd have to report it to that's when the funeral director would have to report to the county level VA who had died and where they were buried. Again, the situation is so rare, but that's one of the things they like to harp on. A death that happens outside the state, going to a cemetery that nobody's in charge of with a veteran, that's when you have to report it to the state level. Again, not something you're going to see a lot of in practice, but it is what it is. So EDRS, again, how to use that EDRS, what are the benefits of it? EDRS has changed everything. It's so great, man. Used to be, I would sit in doctor's offices for hours, man. It was brutal. And they would not sign a death certificate for the longest time. I worked for a funeral director. He used to tell me, oh, take a, this old guy, like, take a park a hearse out front of the doctor's office. They would sign it real fast then. But, I remember sitting in a doctor's office for probably an hour and 45 minutes once just to get them to sign off on something. It was such a pain. EDRS made life a lot easier for us. Burial at sea, what's required? Now, again, if you're a Mercer student, if you open up the supplement, everything is broken down in there. And likewise, the textbook from FUN 203, Principles. I forget the name of the textbook, but it has a breakdown of all the different services as far as if you're going to do a Protestant service or a Catholic or a Muslim or Buddhist, like what would you do in these different situations? And in that, I believe in the book, right in the beginning of it, I believe that it has a breakdown of what you need to drill, the amount of ballast that you need to put onto a casket, the amount of holes that need to be drilled into it, the straps that need to be put on it, how many of them. You need to know that both for the national and for the state test. Signatures and how far do you need to go out to sea if you're burying somebody, and also how far do you have to go out to sea, and what do you need to report if somebody's scattering cremated remains into the ocean? Something a lot of people don't do. They just scatter them, but you're supposed to report it. Who you're supposed to report that to, and what are the requirements? Signatures, what signatures are required on a death certificate and a disinterment permit. And we talked about the disinterment permit earlier. Remember, there's 7 signatures that are required on that. With the death certificate, it's either 4 or 3. The funeral director, the registrar, whoever pronounced the death, and then whoever put on the cause of death, right? Whoever certified it. So it could be up to 4 different signatures that you need on there. Now, it could be 3 if the person who is certifying it also pronounces the death, meaning a doctor walks in, they go, okay, time of death is 3:52 p.m. on July 2nd, 2025. And, the cause of death is whatever. And they write down the cause of death and they write down the time of death and all that stuff. So you'd only have 3 on that one. How many signatures go on the statement of funeral goods and services? Meaning the funeral director always has to sign it with their license number, and you need somebody who's, who is responsible for the bill to sign off on it, or at least they're the person taking the estimate. Again, if it's a pre-need situation, they're not required to pay anything, but in, an at-need, yes, it changes things there. But all of that needs to be specified on the document. It's a pre-need, is it an at-need, is it a price quote? A price quote, you need to still sign it, or the funeral director still needs to sign it. If the family's a little wonky about it, I'm not sure if I should sign this or not. Well, then, yeah, that in that situation, you can just put the price quote, and then they don't need to sign off on it. The FTC disclosure, that's not required by anybody. It's a good thing to have, saying that somebody received the general price list, casket prices, that are burial container price list, but it's not required by anybody. So there are no signatures in particular that are needed on there. From a practical standpoint, if you use something like that, yeah, you have the next of kin sign it, or any disclaimers you use, or whatever. That's again not required by the state, but it's a good idea to have. UAGA, it's a Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, meaning that what this allows for is if you want to donate your body to science, or you want to give up organs, or long bones, or whatever you want, well, the decedent themselves can authorize that prior to death, and that is still binding. So secondly, with the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act is when a family is giving a body to a medical school or an institution, like we have a donor program at Mercer, and we are set up like a medical school, in that families giving us bodies, they bequeath them to us. They don't just give them to us, they bequeath them to us, meaning we have total control over that decedent. Family calls up 3 months later, and they go, we changed our mind. We went at that bar. I could say, no, too bad. Go pound sand. I wouldn't, but theoretically I could. And the idea is, if you donate a body to medical science, and like we have that one table in the classroom that Alda just got before she left and went out to Mid-America to become a dean of whatever out there. But anyway, what they would do at the body is they would just shave off the tiniest little millimeter of like the nose, and then keep working their way down. They would do the whole body and just shave the tiny little shreds off hundreds of thousands of times on an individual body. They take each of these things and they scan them and recreate the body in a digital format in this table. Well, you can't be halfway through that, and the family goes up, well, we want to have a viewing, and we demand you give us mom's remains back. Well, no, you might be halfway through, basically shredding this body so you can record each little, detail in it. You're halfway through that. You can't give a body back to that situation. That's why UAGA exists. Victims of crime compensation. How much money can you get compensated on that? Somebody's murdered. Medical waste. Okay, what's required there? The idea of, cradle to grave responsibility, meaning that, you pay this company to dispose of your medical waste, because you hired them because they're cheaper than any other company, and they're cheap because the guy who comes out to pick up everything, he stops and has, I don't know, a 3-martini lunch on the way home. He's in an accident. All your medical waste is kicked out of the truck or whatever. It scatters all over a playground where kids are. The funeral home's still responsible for that. You didn't do anything wrong in particular, but they will still hold you responsible. As that cradle to the grave, the funeral home is responsible for any medical waste that they generate. What constitutes medical waste and what doesn't? Something's fully caked through with blood. Yeah, that would be medical waste. If you just have something with a little drop of blood on it, well, that's not. Think about your home, right? Like if you take a Band-Aid off, my kids are forever skinning their knees. It's not like I take a Band-Aid off their knee and I have to put it in medical waste. It's thrown in the regular trash. So what constitutes medical waste and what doesn't? Will's terminology, right? That's a whole thing in itself. I don't teach law, so I tend to not go into that, but you need to know all the terms as far as wills are concerned, and the different types of wills. And again, the different people who are in charge of it and all that fun stuff. All right, prohibited embalming compounds. This is a dumb thing that I do not know why it's in New Jersey regulations. It's not like not like I'm whipping up a thing of embalming fluid in my tub in my house or something, but they say, well, if you're making embalming fluid, you can't include these things. I don't know funeral home that makes embalming fluid. It's crazy, but you're not allowed to include any of these things in there. Arsenic, lead, mercury, zinc, silver, antimony, chloral, any poisonous alkaloid. And it's included in the statute as well. And that includes copper and cyanogen. Things you have to know, take the test, you can promptly forget all this stuff. Same thing on the next slide. Here are the ones I couldn't remember. Smallpox. I should have come up with that. Cholera, yellow fever, typhus fever, and plague. I was wrong with malaria completely, so that's my bad. But these are the communicable diseases. You need to know these. Smallpox, cholera, yellow fever, typhus fever, and plague. If you haven't seen it with them, you have to report it, I believe, in 12 hours. Double check that number. And as far as how does that impact a temporary grave? And that's something that I think was in here. I don't know why I did not get to it. If you remember a temporary grave, I must have just skimmed over it and not talked about it. Interment, disinterment, multiple burials, disinterment. Oh, temporary burial. I did. I never covered it. You can do a temporary burial if somebody's going into a grave and you're waiting for a mausoleum to be built, let's say, and it's in the same cemetery. You can put on the burial permit, it is a temporary burial. And if you put that on there, you can disinter the person and have them put into the mausoleum or whatever the reason is, so long as it's in the cemetery, in the same cemetery, you do not need to get a disinterment permit. But that has to be set up at the time of death because it has to be on the burial permit. This is a temporary burial. And again, if you're going across the street to another cemetery, you can't do this. It has to be within the same cemetery grounds. Oh, good. Good. So yeah, that's all that I have for you folks. For now at least. But again, any questions I see? Rabia, thank you for putting that in there. That's very detailed. 2 years and older, 3056 for Medicaid, family put in 5070, cemetery 714, and max is 5340. 1 week to 2 years is 2494. Family can contribute 1178 and 583 to the cemetery, and a stillborn to 6 days is 1933, 785 to the cemetery or crematory, and then 452 max that the family can put in there. No, I guess the family can put in 785, excuse me, and then 452 would go to the cemetery or crematory. So good. Thank you for putting that in there, Rabia. So yeah, you guys are in good shape, I believe. And again, while you're prepping for this thing, always feel free to reach out to me. I'm away from campus for the summer, but I do check my email on a regular basis. I mean, if not daily, at the most, I'll put it off, one day. So if you have questions about any of this stuff, feel free to reach out to me. I think I see a lot of names in here that I recognize. So if I see your name, I know that you've been through laws, rules, and regs, FUN 220. But if you're from a different school and you need some of those notes or anything, feel free to reach out to me. I don't care where you went to school, if you're an Eastwick student or a McAllister student. I don't care. I just want people to pass these tests. So always feel free to reach out to me with questions about that or any questions they have in general about the national or anything else. So good. Any thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? All right. I didn't realize how late it was. I didn't realize how long that takes. I always say that. And then whenever I'm done, I'm like, oh, I can't believe how long that was. I'm going to save this video and I'm going to put this onto the Yahoo, the YouTube page. And I will make it open so that, anybody can access it. It's MCCC Fun Program on YouTube. And if you go to it, the only thing that I make public are these reviews. So yes, you're welcome. I'm happy to do it, and I hope everybody passes this test on the
Thank
first
you.
time. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And like I said, if anybody has questions about this stuff, please feel free to reach out to me. And like I said, whether you're a Mercer student or not, I don't care. I just want everybody to pass the darn test first time through. So good. Well, if there are no questions, I'm going to wrap it up there. And again, all the best on the test. I did not mean to rhyme that, but whatever. All the best with it. And like I said, this is not a comprehensive review. I don't have a list of the questions. So please go back, look at the regulations, look at the statutes. They put a lot in there, but please read them. And if you have questions, reach out to me, or if you went somewhere else to one of your instructors there, but you're welcome to reach out to me as well. So good. If there's no questions, I'm going to let you folks go. And again, take care and all the best. Repeat the YouTube link. Well, again, the YouTube page is MCCC Fun FUN Program. Let me double check on that just to make sure I have the right. I'm giving the right name because I have two YouTube accounts. I have a personal one, and not that it's similar in name, but I always not that I forget, but yeah, MCCC. It is Funeral Service Program. I'm sorry, I was saying FUN Program. It's MCCC Funeral Service Program. So that's, I'm going to copy this. I'll put that in there and then we'll wrap it up. If I'm this, Control V, there we go. So there's the link, the name on YouTube. And like I said, if you can't find it, reach out to me. I could always send you the link or whatever. So I could send you yeah, I could send you the link for it. So good. Take care, all. And like I said, if you take the test, please reach out to me. Let me know how you feel that you did on it. And you know, and again, I'm not trying to farm questions here. I just want to know, well, you know, it covered everything, or let's say there's a bunch of stuff on there that you didn't see. I don't need a list of it. Just tell me that I'm not hitting the mark here. I'll go back and review everything. So, all right, take care, folks.